This is Thinking Outside the Box, Creative Solutions for Wisconsin's Energy Future. So if you're in the wrong room, there's still time to run. My name's David Bender. I'm a lawyer at a nonprofit called Earth Justice. I, as a lawyer, know nothing, so I'll put it to my fellow panelists for all the hard questions from you all. I think we'll just start by, but you guys are smart lawyers, it's different. I'll start by just asking my co-panelists here to introduce themselves.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes, okay. I'm Jenna Ginsberg. I'm actually the one not lawyer on this panel. So by Dave's logic, apparently I know the most. So we'll see how that goes. I am a senior policy manager at Generac Power Systems, and I will probably share more about what we do, but I'll pass it to my panelists now. And two of my colleagues are in the front row wearing Generac swag. So if you have lots of technical questions, please ask them.
Hi, everybody. My name is Baron Argetsinger. I'm a partner with the law firm Keys and Fox, and some of my colleagues are also here too, led by my partner Tim Lindell, who many of you I'm sure know. I work on a lot of distributed energy resource issues, and particularly virtual power plant program kind of development, design, and implementation before state public utilities commissions around the country. So I look forward to the discussion today with everybody.
And my name is John Albers. I'm a recovering attorney. I'm the Regulatory Policy Director for Advanced Energy United. And for those of you who are not familiar with United, we are a trade association, nationwide footprint. I'm the director for the Central Region, and we represent all the clean tech. So batteries, EVs, solar, wind, things you'd expect, but also smart thermostats like Ecobee thermostats from Generac. Smart water heaters, heat pumps, that kind of stuff. So we believe that it's going to take all of that. There's no one silver bullet to getting to 100% clean. We think it's going to take all of that to get us to 100% clean. That's our mission in legislative and public utility commission venues to try to get good policy in place.
So as we kick off our discussion, there's a lot of alphabet involved. So like a BYODER for a VPP. You all probably know what that means. I only know some of the letters, but my co-panelists know all of them. Just so for some initial table setting, I think everyone's agreed to help define a few of the main concepts and kind of their promise for Wisconsin.
So I can kick off. I realize I didn't quite give you any of my portfolio insights. So like I said, I work for Generac. Some of you might know us. We are a 65-year-old Wisconsin proud company, really founded on the concept of resilience and resiliency in the power sector. And more recently, in the past 5+ years, we've really diversified exactly what we see the future of resilience and energy independence will look like in this country and for our customers, both on the residential and commercial side. So we not only have our legacy, standby generator product, we've diversified to include solar plus storage, Ecobee smart thermostats, electric vehicle charging, microgrid inverters, and a few other technologies that kind of make our energy technology portfolio. And what we see resilience and DERs, so there's our first one, distributed energy resources. We see resilience in DERs as exactly that, is you can inject these distributed energy resources, this flexible load. We'll get into that as well. You can take these technologies and kind of really embed more resiliency across the energy ecosystem.
So I'll just tackle a couple of terms kind of building off of what Jenna was just describing around distributed energy resources. When the way I think about distributed energy resources, we're talking about either community solar and very often customer-sited solar, battery storage, smart thermostats. It can even mean things like controllable water heaters and electric vehicles. So we can kind of put them into a few different categories when we start to think about utilizing these types of resources beyond just the customer sort of energy use case or service case. When we think about a smart thermostat or a controllable water heater, for instance, those can be aggregated into a virtual power plant type of program, and coordinated. Their operations can be coordinated to reduce customer load in response to a particular grid event, often like a system peak demand type of event. Battery storage provides even greater flexibility in how you can control the customer load. You can both reduce load by discharging that battery to supply the customer's needs during a particular event, but you can also export any remaining capacity to provide power injections directly into the grid, which just enhances the ability to utilize these customer-sided resources to provide grid support needs. And similar to like a stationary battery located at someone's home, an electric vehicle also has similar types of capabilities. And we can also think about sort of like managed charging and those kinds of things with EVs. But at their core, these are customer-sided resources or more distributed resources, not necessarily having to be at the customer site, wanting to also capture like community solar. And it's all about how we manage those resources in coordination with each other to meet grid needs. And that's the concept of a virtual power plant, kind of largely. So we'll be talking about those kinds of things today.
I'm going to jump in for 1 second. I think just something Barron's highlighting is the dispatchability of DERs, especially when we're talking about resilience, VPPs, all these terms are getting at the same point, is that we have this capacity that is not being tapped because DERs already exist across our system. So I just think it's something to keep in mind when I talked about resiliency, just that you can use them, you can dispatch them in extreme weather events and also just normal peak flows of the day. The utilities, the aggregators, whoever is controlling these resources and has access to how you dispatch them, there's really a way to leverage them for the better flexibility and just keeping reliability embedded in the grid. John, sorry.
No, that's no problem. Yeah, I think you guys did a great job describing it, so I'm not sure what's left for me, but and that's okay. But I will just throw in there that VPPs, I think they're new to Wisconsin. We've been told that the Wisconsin PSC Public Service Commission is probably not really current on a lot of that. I think our message from United when we're talking to folks is that our members and in other jurisdictions are actively engaged in VPPs now. I mean, they're working in other states, and there's no reason that Wisconsin can't be part of that. They have huge potential to reduce utility peak load and reduce cost for consumers just overall. And if you talk about like an economic dispatch situation, like Jenna just said, just daily, if it makes more sense to deploy a VPP than to start up a gas-fired, peaker plant somewhere. That's what should be getting done. So I think we got more comments we can share with you later. But I think in the grand scheme of things, my message is there's huge potential, and Wisconsin does not need to reinvent the wheel. They can take advantage of existing experiences out there and work learn from that and immediately get going here if they wants to.
I'm going to just add one thing on VPPs, because like John said, I'm a proud United member. Generac is very happy. I work with John a lot. And I'd say something to kind of dispel about VPPs, because they are virtual power plants. There's a lot of confusion about exactly what are they. So I think the word virtual makes them it's perhaps a misnomer. Maybe they're digital power plants, but they exist. They're functioning, and they can function just as reliably and predictably as an old-fashioned fossil fuel plant. And I think that's just something really important to understand, is that if you can orchestrate and aggregate these resources, that you have a virtual power plant. They already exist. So like John said, these assets exist. It's just how you're harnessing them. So I think I want to just dispel the myth around the term VPP, because there is untapped capacity there. So we call it virtual, but it already exists. It's not like in the cloud or something. These are assets that the grid can call on all the time.
All right, that's the easy questions. Now the hard question. So in preparation, I went to check where we're at as a state. And I think by all measures, our DER penetration in Wisconsin right now is anemic. So according to the data I saw, only 2% of retail customers in Wisconsin participate in utility-run demand response programs, compared to 7 to 27% in our 4 neighboring states. The amount of demand response in utility resource adequacy plans has been going down year over year, whereas utilities in the region, it's been going up. So that's demand response. Distributed solar, we rank near the bottom, I think 17th from the bottom out of all states and territories. Despite the fact that Wisconsin was one of the first states to adopt net metering, we have higher rates than our neighboring states. We have 30% higher rates than Iowa, and our distributed solar uptake is 1/2 of Iowa's. We also have higher rates than Minnesota and Illinois, and we have about 1/3 of the distributed solar uptake as those 2 states. So on the whole, behind our peers, not catching up. And now to the panelists, what can we do to solve it?
I think the top line message here is that any hindrance or impediment to DER deployment is hurting Wisconsin in this respect. And by hurting Wisconsin, I mean specifically costing ratepayers money. The more smart thermostats you can get out there, the more solar plus storage systems you can get out there, the more EVs with vehicle to grid capacity that you can get out there, that's more potential on the grid that can benefit the grid overall. And so when you've got these assets out there, if you get aggregators in there to come in, offer different innovation, different ideas to customers so they can sign up, deploy their assets as needed to help the grid, that's going to make a big difference in costs. Because Wisconsin is seeing, like a lot of other states are seeing, an increase in electrical load. I mean, I think most people have probably heard by now that, over the last several years or decades, there hasn't been a lot of load growth. But now with data centers and onshoring of manufacturing, we're seeing a lot more demand for electricity. We Energies right now has got 3 different dockets pending at the PSC to build 3 different, but related, large gas infrastructure projects at a total of $1.8 billion that they want to do. And that's going to be a big dent on people's, bills, both gas and electric bills. I'll note, because they want to put part of that into the gas customers' bills, not just electric. So, the concern here is that really the best option? If they had given more consideration to things like VPP, and we asked them, they didn't, you probably wouldn't be seeing, and we know you wouldn't be seeing, a $1.8 billion, proposal to build more gas generation. So, we believe that with things like VPP, you can make a huge difference. So any policies you can implement that would expand and make it easier for customers to do this, the better.
Yeah, I would just expand on what John is describing. It kind of goes back to this fundamental question of well, we're not trying to deploy additional DERs just for the sake of deploying additional DERs. There are real customer benefits associated with these resources, and there are real grid benefits and broader ratepayer benefits that we can harness as long as we have the right policies in place and the right types of programs in place to actually integrate and incorporate these kinds of resources into utilities' daily or regular grid operations and into their long-term planning. And I think a real emphasis is something that we've heard across the panels today, and this isn't just unique to Wisconsin, but load growth from data centers, from electrification, and so on and so forth, coupled with planned retirements in aging and uneconomic fossil generation resources. There's a big resource adequacy gap that's facing Wisconsin and that's facing many states around the country. And so the question is not just when we meet it or how we meet it, but can we meet it? These things are happening quick, and it also takes a lot of time to build centralized power plants, and our transmission systems are stressed. And we all know from transmission planning issues how difficult it can be to plan and site and get these things permitted and ultimately built. So there's long lead times with our centralized generation, which really opens an opportunity for us to think deeply about the kinds of programs that we can implement, the types of policies that we can implement to try to get more distributed energy resources out there that not only we can aggregate to help the grid, but are going to help customers as well. I saw some figures from one of the panels today about the cost of electricity for Wisconsin ratepayers, and just kind of compared to others in the region, and that they continue to grow pretty quickly, significantly above the rate of inflation. And so somebody who can install solar in a battery, there's a real customer use case associated with that. And that's a really important kind of underlying fundamental policy for, or just consideration about how we are trying to get DERs deployed and like what's the customer use case, because ultimately these things are by and large customer sort of focused programs. So we need to be sure to, in order to meet these grid needs that are approaching us, that we have the right policies in place to deploy DERs, that we get customers, that they're the right economic incentives for customers to source. So simplicity in program design, like maintaining the energy metering in Wisconsin as your underlying interconnection tariff, is a really important policy for DER growth in the state. Having the types of VPP type of programs, grid service programs that these customers can then enroll in, creates additional opportunities for them to unlock value and make those resources available to the grid. And so these things kind of all come together. And there are lots of other, related policy and programmatic types of fundamentals, I guess I would say, that are going to influence how well Wisconsin is able to meet that challenge of getting more DERs deployed and creating the right policy frameworks and market structures for these programs to actually be aggregated and made useful as a grid resource. So just as a couple of them, third-party ownership in Wisconsin is not currently allowed. But if you unlock that, you also unlock the ability to expand access to solar and battery storage to more customers. You bring in additional opportunity to take advantage of federal income tax credits. Integrated resource planning was mentioned today. That's a really big one to make utilities think about all of the options that are available when they think about long-term planning, to be sure that you're including demand-side resource opportunities, customer-side resource opportunities, and those are like those VPP types of programs.
Barron didn't leave much, but I will say, something really important, and when he's talking about the IRP process and a few other issues at hand, not only in Wisconsin, like you said, across the country, load growth is, it's on the front of the New York Times. You don't have to be just an energy policy wonk to understand that these issues are happening. The reality is, and I think it's a different panel on how utilities work and make profits, but it's faster and easier. It's faster, easier, and cheaper to get DERs out there. And that's the reality, is we can meet energy demand more efficiently if we actually work with DERs. I'm not saying there isn't a place for traditional utility investments, but the reality is that those central resources take lots of times to get their appropriate approvals, get built, and get online. As we know from AI or anyone who uses their phone, this demand's growing today. So I think that's just a really important point, is that they're available. These assets are available to the grid today, and in not only VPPs, and I think somehow we haven't said the word microgrid yet, but microgrids are another tool, not only in our interests in our toolbox, but they're also in the utilities toolbox. So I think through the IRP process and a few other policy changes, and I think the initial question was around demand response, is how can we be leveraging these assets? A lot of them are on the customer side, especially DERs. So demand response is one, but there's lots of rate design functions. So electric vehicle charging was mentioned. So time of use charging, making sure that we're working in harmony with the grid and the demands of the grid and also the fluctuations of the grid to really offset any of those peaks that these assets can actually abate and leverage more efficiently for all ratepayers. So I think just something to keep in mind is that DERs are also available today, and the cheaper question is going to be the one that I think gets everyone a little stuck, but it's worth the conversation of how we meet demand in the near term, not the long term.
If I could maybe add a couple of thoughts there, because you asked about impediments to the DERs. I think some basic things that they aren't as sexy, but poor data sharing is a big problem. I mean, when you want to cite a project, you often need to know what data is out there to support or justify or explain that we really need to do this project. So having more accurate, up-to-date data from utilities would be fantastic. I know you laugh. But also like on the same note, like hosting capacity maps. Again, it seems obvious, but it would really be helpful if there were better hosting capacity maps out there for developers to rely upon. I think, Mary, you mentioned third-party ownership for solar. I mean, I will add emphasis on that as well. I mean, to me, it's just kind of a no-brainer. I mean, the neighbors all allow it. Why is Wisconsin, different on that? Oh, wait, I know. Utilities capital bias, yes. That's the last thing I was going to mention. I mean, to me, yes, we all know that's the elephant in the room. I mean, they like to build stuff. The more they spend on building stuff, the more money they get to make for shareholders. But I think there needs to be a realization that that's not really a sound energy policy. If you want to have, smart investment and maintain low-cost power, not just because it makes you feel good to say that for your customers, but also because, businesses look at that when they're deciding where to add new facilities. If they got a choice between high power rates in Wisconsin and lower power rates in one of your neighboring states, that's going to make a decision or factor into their decision on where they site their facility and hire new people. So it makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things. If you take a look at these little things, it can really add up and really influence, make a positive difference for Wisconsin. So
I'm just going to add one thing. He mentioned hosting capacity. There's also capacity shortfall mapping. It's not very common, but I think it's also something important to note that where there are gaps across systems. And I think this is a significant point because often they intersect with LMI, low to moderate income communities. Sorry, I'm trying really hard to not use acronyms. So I think that's another point, is that the utilities are also aware of a lot of the weaknesses on their system and their service territory do often overlay with these communities, whether it's perhaps in Wisconsin, it's more the rural communities who don't have as much access to these energy resources, or in a more congested area, it's crowded parts of city centers. I think it's something important to note is that the utilities can work closely with energy technology companies like us and whoever we represent on kind of how do you pinpoint where DER injections would actually be the most effective, not just because we think these products are fantastic, is because it's actually going to help their system and improve reliability. So that's just, the other part of it is that's the reality, is they're not meeting their reliability quotas as well.
All right, so taking notes. I think we had cost of service rate making and utility structure, a small issue. Rate design, lack of VPP policy, lack of IRP policy, lack of third-party ownership, clarity, hosting capacity maps or shortfall maps. So lightning round before we go to questions. What's your top 3? And bonus points if you can point to any other state doing it well.
Walk down the line.
I'm gonna answer the question that I wanted you to ask. I'm just going to be honest about that. But seriously, though, connected solutions, in response to your question, is the example that I hear our members referencing a lot as a good example. That's done in like several New England states. I think it has slightly different flavors depending on what state you're in, but largely I believe it is generally viewed as a good, positive, example of a VPP. But I think I do want to mention though that the elements of what our members and the industry thinks is a good VPP. There are some basic fundamental ideas that I think I just want to throw out there right quick that might help us think about how to plan for the future. One of them is that it should be tech neutral, technology neutral. I think a lot of industry folks, like depending on what industry you're in, would like for the program to benefit their particular industry. That's fine. I mean, that's your interest. You're right. But United's position is, it should be tech neutral. Solar plus storage is great. It's often a very useful one because it can export to the grid as well. But you also need to make sure that you're addressing things like smart thermostats because, hey, it is simple. I mean, it is a simple thing to implement and adopt, and it can be implemented very quickly as well. So, whatever method hopefully Wisconsin develops, it should be tech neutral and, has a framework to add new technologies as they emerge. Maybe we'll start with smart thermostats, smart water heaters, but if somebody comes up with something else that can be a demand response tool later, we need to have that framework there so we can plug it in and give it adequate compensation. Which leads me to my other point, pay for performance. If people enroll in this, reward them for their participation. To say that, it's going to be hard to convince people to participate if you say, okay, we'll give you $50 if you enroll your thermostat, and then forever, as long as you have that, we get to play with it. No, people aren't going to enroll in that. It's just human nature. Why should I make an investment in something and then let you control it? So, pay them for performance. Give them an incentive to make their asset available to the grid. Allow third parties to be participants in this effort. Aggregators, as we call them in the industry. They aggregate all these different assets and then respond to utility signals to activate them to provide the benefit. Utilities often want to run these programs themselves. I get that that's not uncommon, but, I'll compare it to my experience in the telecom industry. When we had the outset of competitive telecommunication services, we had multiple different carriers come out and offer different packages to customers. And customers got to choose what works best for them. If we have aggregators come out there, they can innovate, they can, develop new ideas, and a lot of them bring their own technology as well, their own software for that grid edge element of controlling these assets. If they bring their own technology, guess what? Ratepayers aren't paying the utility to develop because the aggregator already has it. So it's going to end up saving money for ratepayers in that respect as well. I can go through some more fundamental elements, but I think those are the top three because I don't want to monopolize the time up here.
No, I think you hit on some really key points for sort of like virtual power plant type of program design pieces. One thing that I wanted to know, I kind of wanted to know a little bit of a positive around, like we identified a bunch of hurdles to program design and DER deployment and the utilization of DERs to provide grid services in Wisconsin. Those are all things that would be beneficial, I think, that we identified if those could be enacted. But there are good things happening, and we can build on those currently with utility leadership and with collaboration between industry and utility and our policymakers. So I just wanted to highlight, this is something that along the lines of what John was talking about being technology neutral. So currently, the smart thermostat demand response programs, I think that MG&E has currently is an existing type of what we call today like a virtual power plant program, but it is just a traditional demand response program that utilizes those customer resources to help reduce load at key times of the day. We could do better to add more smart thermostat to those programs. I think Dave mentioned there's like 2% of customers that are enrolled currently. So certainly want to increase the number of customers participating in the demand response element through smart thermostats. But we also could adapt that program to allow, the utility could adapt that program to allow for customers with battery storage, for instance, to also participate. But instead of only limiting the resources sort of utilization to reducing customer load, use that battery, discharge it, reduce all the customer load at the particular time, and then whatever capacity is left over, make sure that that program is also compensating the customer for the exports that it would deliver to the grid as well. Just one point, kind of about opportunities that are here today. There are existing structures that we can actually build on to start to get some of that momentum towards more kind of, I think, what we would think of as sort of the more ideal programs that we see operating in other states that are operating much more at scale and that are having a significant impact for utilities in reducing peak load and reducing costs for ratepayers. So one specific example, John mentioned it, is Connected Solutions in some of the Northeast states implement. But I wanted to highlight specifically that program operates exactly how I'm describing what we could do here in Wisconsin by taking a traditional sort of demand response program with smart thermostats and operating those. But then under that same framework or within that same management ecosystem, the utility could also bolt on a battery storage program, and recognizing that there are differences between how smart thermostats are used and what the customer use case would be. We don't want to interrupt the customer load too many times with a smart thermostat by reducing their temperature or increasing their temperature. So we might operate that a little bit differently than we do with a battery, because when you operate the battery, the customer really, there's no impact on the customer per se. It just discharges, and they don't really know, like they would with a smart thermostat, changing their temperature. But those types of different types of programs and the ability to integrate those different technologies into these programs, there's lots of examples around the country where this is happening. And some of the recent work that Keys and Fox has done with the nonprofit organization Solar United Neighbors to create a model virtual power plant program tariff that incorporates a lot of these same principles that John was just talking about, a lot of the same principles that are in the Connected Solutions program, principles that are kind of, for lack of a better word, sort of best practices in balancing customer needs with taking those resources and making them available to the utility to meet grid needs. And so I think that's like a resource and a tool that we could look to for trying to advance what is a starting framework here in Wisconsin to improve upon those programs and help to start achieve some of these goals that we're talking about with resource adequacy gaps and really start to advance just the deployment of DERs and utilization of them.
I went last again. That was a mistake. I'd say there's two things I'd add. Something specific to Wisconsin right now is some of the limitations on the statutes that, what the PSC can kind of require. But I want to highlight that doesn't mean the utility cannot propose anything. So I say that knowing our utility partners in the state are exactly that. They're the partners who need to come forth with these ideas and all the topics we've discussed about how do you integrate these resources, how do you use them, how do you dispatch them, how do you innovate with rate design. The utility can come forward with these programs, and I think that's really important in how we move that needle. And for those who don't follow the riveting Supreme Court decisions in Wisconsin around aggregation, there was a change about 6 months ago. It was in the summer, something like that, John? I'm looking at you. Yeah. There was a change in that aggregation it's now allowed in Wisconsin, and that means resources can be aggregated. And that's really significant because it's the first of many required market signals to bring aggregators to the state to start using those tech neutral policies to bring these resources to inject in the grid. So that's one point. And then I think on more of the macro policy sense in Wisconsin, we can keep pushing on the governor's agenda. He has his climate principles, and then importantly, maybe Wisconsin needs a storage target. I don't have a number to throw out today, but I think that is something that, again, it's a market signal. How we get there is through all these tools that we've been discussing today, and it also really will show that we need to start building a more robust portfolio of resources here in the state. So those are some of the tools that we see are really effective in moving the needle in states. And the ones that have had these programs like Connected Solution is mostly in New England. And then there's some great programs being run out of Texas. It's not all just in California. I think it's important that they have robust targets, and they're trying to get these plans in place, and that all of us work together on getting these policies running and live.
Anyone have questions for any of our panelists?
You can just vocalize it. Acoustic in here.
Cool. So another one, in my opinion, is also purely valuing resiliency. We often see, like, if I go and site a 2 megawatt battery project on a farm, it's impossible for me to empirically value if the grid goes down, there's a blackout, there's rolling back out, there's reduction in whatever might occur, what savings they're going to have that their operations continue on through that. And I think that's a big part of DER because utility scale, yeah, you're generating all of it, but what happens in between there might occur. And we see this a lot in Texas. I get Wisconsin's kind of a climate haven. It's in the Midwest, but we'll see that with increased load and increased intermittent resources being put on the grid, we're going to see changes to the grid. So what I've found is being able to empirically value what resiliency provides two things. First, it provides the customer incentive, but then it also for the utility, but then also it provides the financiers. The big bankables, the big bank that invests all in utility scale, we need to bring them over to DERs. And I think that having that in the economic model and being able to empirically value that would be a big hurdle for DERs and proliferation of it. I guess I got to have a question at the end there. I just thought, I guess my thoughts are on that, and I know Texas is the greatest example because now when all these storms hit and the grid goes down, they say X amount was saved by DERs and batteries. So like that's what I've been using as kind of my model, but I just feel like we're going to continuously see that occur, and that's a big hurdle in my opinion. And then the visibility on the D-grid is a big thing.
So I'll just summarize that in a short question is, how do you value the resilience of a VPP?
I can go first, and Baron, I think you had something to add. I think some of what you're saying is happening. So a lot of DERs, VPPs, they're functioning kind of like capacity markets. For those who are familiar with how capacity markets work, is that exactly like that. I think Texas is a perfect example, especially in the aftermath of Winter Storm Uri 3 years ago, 4 years ago now, I think. Exactly that is that VPPs are able to provide that capacity forecast of exactly how much load will be injected. So I don't have a number to give you in terms of the actual dollar amount value, but there is value that is being ascribed to these markets, and they are able to bid that in and arbitrage with the utilities. ERCOT's different, the way it functions in the rest of the country, let's say, but you can work with the utilities and say, we can actually provide X number of megawatts, gigawatts maybe, in certain states to kind of, especially in extreme weather events, to say we're going to actually inject X amount to make sure that the lights stay on in that area or whatever it is. So I think that is happening. Barriers for Wisconsin are way more complex because, like we said, it is our growth of DVRs is anemic. I don't think we have that capacity built out here, or we don't have it tapped and aggregated, which is a whole other problem. But I hear you, and I definitely agree is that these are values that financial folks, let's say, they understand that there's a dollar amount, just like traditional capacity day ahead markets work. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
I would just say, I think inherent in any good VPP program should be that when the customer is paid for performance, that value should include not just things like peak load reduction, but also, the capacity and the thing you're talking about. It needs to take a broad look at the benefits to the grid, not just a narrow look at how much was peak load reduced and how much of that saved the utility of that particular day.
You mentioned it. They did, yeah. You mentioned this is partially a question for the moderator. You mentioned aggregation, so my question is, what is FERC Order 2222? What's the status of its implementation in Wisconsin? Can we actually aggregate now? And then 3 is, do you need that in order to do a virtual power plant?
Anyone else? I think I had offered to dive on any grenades that were tossed out. So those that don't know, Order 2222 is 5 years old now. Still, so MISO, so what it requires, FERC requires the ISO and RTO, so MISO for us, to include in their markets the ability for aggregations of DERs to register as market participants. Right? So that's not wealthy enough. So basically, you can, so previously you can aggregate, unless your state opts out, demand response as a market participant. Now that's expanded to kind of the broad category of DER. Right? And so that's, FERC says you must and file a tariff to do it. Might as well file a tariff that I think the first iteration was like, we'll do it in 2030. It was like 10 years after the order. A number of organizations, probably including many up here, filed protests to it. FERC said, not good enough, do it again. Like, that's too long. I think the last iteration is maybe 20 weeks for implementation. And I think protests again. I think there's a decision yet on that. But so, if approved as proposed, 2028, and that would be a wholesale market VPP model, which we haven't talked about much here, but has kind of a superstructure or an option that would be in addition to a retail tariff option. I don't know if that answered or avoided enough of your question.
I would just add one piece to that because I think what you just described there at the end, Dave, about the difference between a wholesale market VPP aggregation type of model versus a retail, we call it a retail, but we're really talking about sort of a utility-led tariff-based type of program is a really important distinction to remember when we talk about VPPs because there are multiple participation models for VPPs. And one of the key points I think that is important for policymakers and for advocates to distinguish is that are those differences and the participation pathways and when they might become available. And so the key here is that the wholesale market participation pathway for certain resources exists today, but the expanded opportunity through Order 2222 for like battery storage resource customers to be aggregated doesn't exist right now, but that doesn't mean there are not opportunities to make programs at the state level available to quickly activate and make those resources available for the utility to provide important grid services that we know that we need sort of immediately.
Thanks a lot. It looks like we're at time, but if you guys have more questions, these guys are probably going to be around for a little bit, so feel free to come on up and let's give these guys a hand for participating.